Captain Marcus Wellington had served as head of security at Rosemont Palace for 12 years, but nothing had prepared him for the chaos that erupted on that foggy Tuesday morning in November. The ancient stone corridors echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps as he rushed toward the East Wing, where young Prince Alexander had been found crying in the music room. The 8-year-old prince sat hunched on the piano bench, his small shoulders shaking with each sob. His governess, Mrs. Hartwell, knelt beside him, her usually composed face etched with concern. When Captain Wellington entered the ornate room with its towering windows and crystal chandeliers, the boy looked up with tear-stained cheeks. She was recording Charlotte again. Prince Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible above the grandfather clock's steady ticking. I saw the red light on her phone when she thought no one was looking. Charlotte doesn't know, but I heard everything. Captain Wellington's jaw tightened. For weeks, there had been whispers among the staff about strange incidents involving the Queen Consort, Lady Victoria Pemberton. The palace had always been a place of carefully guarded privacy, where every conversation and interaction was protected by centuries of tradition and modern security protocols. The idea that someone within the royal household might be secretly recording private moments was not just a breach of protocol. It was a betrayal of the highest order. Mrs. Hartwell exchanged a meaningful glance with the captain. They both knew that Princess Charlotte, Alexander's 12-year-old sister, had been struggling lately. The young princess had become increasingly withdrawn, often spending hours alone in the library or wandering the palace gardens with her beloved spaniel, Duchess. If someone had been secretly documenting her private moments during this vulnerable time, it could explain her recent behavior. Tell me exactly what you saw, Your Highness, Captain Wellington said gently, crouching down to the boy's eye level. His military training had taught him to gather facts methodically, but his years protecting the royal family had also shown him the importance of treating each family member with the dignity their position demanded, regardless of age. Prince Alexander wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve, a gesture that reminded everyone present that despite his royal title, he was still just a child. It was yesterday afternoon when Charlotte was practicing her violin in the conservatory. Lady Victoria came in and said she wanted to listen, but she kept her phone pointed at Charlotte the whole time. The little red recording light was on. I could see it from where I was hiding behind the ferns. The conservatory was Princess Charlotte's sanctuary, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants where she often retreated to practice her music or simply think. The idea that this sacred space had been violated made Captain Wellington's blood boil, though his expression remained carefully neutral. And this wasn't the first time? Mrs. Hartwell prompted softly. The young prince shook his head vigorously. Last week, when Charlotte was talking to her friend Sarah on the phone about the bullying at school, Lady Victoria was listening from the doorway with her phone out. And before that, when Charlotte was crying about what those mean girls said about her dress at the state dinner, Lady Victoria was there too, always with that phone. Captain Wellington felt a cold fury settling in his chest. Princess Charlotte had indeed been the target of some cruel comments from her classmates after a recent state dinner where her choice of dress had been criticized in the tabloids. For a 12-year-old girl already struggling with the pressures of royal life, such attacks were devastating. The thought that someone had been secretly recording her most vulnerable moments was unconscionable. Why didn't you tell someone sooner? Mrs. Dorison spoke, Hartwell asked, though her tone held no judgment. I tried to tell Charlotte, but she didn't believe me, Alexander said, fresh tears starting to flow. She said Lady Victoria was just being kind by spending time with her. Charlotte thinks everyone is trying to help her feel better about the dress thing and the mean girls. She doesn't know that Lady Victoria might be... What, Your Highness? Captain Wellington encouraged gently. Might be selling the recordings to those nasty newspapers, the boy finished in a rush, then immediately looked terrified that he had spoken such a serious accusation aloud. Captain Wellington and Mrs. Hartwell exchanged another look, this one filled with grave concern. If Prince Alexander's suspicions were correct, they were dealing with not just a betrayal of trust, but potentially a criminal act that could have devastating consequences for the entire royal family. The British tabloids paid enormous sums for exclusive access to private royal moments, and secretly recorded conversations involving the young princess would be worth a fortune. Your Highness, I need you to think very carefully, Captain Wellington said. Have you seen Lady Victoria do anything else that seemed unusual? Any other times when she was recording or taking pictures when she shouldn't have been? Prince Alexander's eyes widened as memories seemed to flood back. The family dinner last Sunday, when Papa was talking about the problems with Parliament and Mama was crying about the newspaper stories, Lady Victoria had her phone under the table. I could see the screen glowing, and she kept looking down at it like she was doing something important. This revelation hit Captain Wellington like a physical blow. Family dinners at Rosemont Palace were considered among the most private moments in royal life. If recordings of such intimate conversations existed, they could cause not just personal embarrassment, but genuine constitutional crises. The thought of the Queen Consort's private struggles being broadcast to the world made his protective instincts surge. Hartwell placed a comforting hand on Prince Alexander's shoulder. You've been very brave to tell us this, dear. Now, I need you to promise me something very important. You must not confront Lady Victoria about this, and you must not tell Princess Charlotte what you suspect until we can investigate properly. Can you promise me that? The young prince nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the situation even if he couldn't fully comprehend its implications. Will you stop her from hurting Charlotte any more? We're going to do everything in our power to protect your sister and your entire family, Captain Wellington assured him, his voice carrying the weight of a sacred oath. But I need you to continue being observant without being obvious about it. If you see anything else suspicious, you come directly to me or Mrs. Petua. Hartwell. Don't try to handle it yourself. As they prepared to leave the music room, Captain Wellington's mind was already racing through the protocols that would need to be followed. Any investigation involving a member of the royal household required delicate handling, especially when it involved someone as close to the family as Lady Victoria. But if Prince Alexander's accusations proved true, swift action would be essential to prevent further damage. One more thing, Your Highness, Captain Wellington said as they reached the door. How long has Lady Victoria been paying special attention to Princess Charlotte? Prince Alexander thought for a moment, his young face scrunched in concentration. It started after the dress thing happened, maybe 3 weeks ago? Before that, she barely talked to us except at formal dinners. But after Charlotte started getting upset about the newspapers, suddenly Lady Victoria wanted to be her friend. This timeline sent chills down Captain Wellington's spine. If Lady Victoria had deliberately positioned herself to exploit Princess Charlotte's vulnerability, it suggested a level of calculated manipulation that went beyond simple greed. It spoke to someone willing to emotionally abuse a child for financial gain. As they walked through the palace corridors, passing portraits of centuries of royal ancestors, Captain Wellington couldn't help but think about the weight of tradition and trust that surrounded them. The royal family's security wasn't just about protecting them from external threats. It was about maintaining the sanctity of their private lives so they could function as both public figures and human beings. Someone within their inner circle violating that trust represented a threat more insidious than any assassin or terrorist. Mrs. Hartwell, he said quietly as they approached the administrative wing, I'll need you to document everything Prince Alexander has told us. Use the secure protocols. This information cannot leave the inner circle until we determine our next steps. The governess nodded grimly. What about Princess Charlotte? Should we increase her supervision? Discreetly, yes. And I want a complete review of all electronic devices that have been in proximity to family members over the past month. If recordings exist, we need to know the full extent of the breach. Captain Wellington paused at his office door, his hand on the brass handle. This conversation never happened in any official capacity until I give the authorization. The last thing we need is premature action that could compromise both the investigation and the family's safety. As Mrs. Hartwell continued down the hallway with Prince Alexander, Captain Wellington entered his office and immediately activated the secure communication system that connected him directly to the highest levels of royal security. The investigation that would follow would require resources, discretion, and above all, speed. Because if Prince Alexander was right about Lady Victoria's activities, then every moment they delayed could mean more private family moments being recorded more intimate conversations being captured, and more potential ammunition being gathered for what could be the most devastating breach of royal privacy in modern history. The race against time had begun. The following morning dawned crisp and clear over Rosemont Palace, but Captain Wellington had barely slept. His secure communication with the Royal Protection Command had set in motion a series of events that would need to unfold with surgical precision. As he reviewed the preliminary security footage from the palace's extensive surveillance system, his worst fears began to take shape. Technical specialist Jennifer Chen had worked through the night, analyzing digital traces and metadata from the palace's internal networks. Her findings, displayed across multiple monitors in the secure operations room, painted a disturbing picture of systematic surveillance that went far beyond what Prince Alexander had witnessed. "Sir, you need to see this," Chen said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I've identified at least 17 instances in the past 3 weeks where Lady Victoria's personal device showed unusual data transmission patterns. Large file uploads to encrypted cloud storage services, always occurring within hours of private family interactions." Captain Wellington studied the data streams, his military training helping him quickly understand the implications. What's the total volume we're talking about? Approximately 43 hours of high-quality audio recordings, plus what appears to be several hours of video content. Chen pulled up another screen showing network analysis. The uploads always happened late at night when most of the family was asleep, suggesting she was deliberately trying to avoid detection. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Captain Wellington had hoped that Prince Alexander's observations might represent isolated incidents, perhaps misunderstandings or coincidences. Instead, they appeared to be dealing with a sustained campaign of surveillance that had captured intimate family moments across nearly a month. Any indication of where these files were being sent? The cloud storage accounts trace back to a series of shell companies registered in various offshore jurisdictions, Chen replied. But I was able to identify communication between those accounts and several known intermediaries who specialize in selling exclusive content to tabloid publications. Captain Wellington felt his jaw clench involuntarily. The confirmation that these recordings were being prepared for sale to the media transformed this from a personal betrayal into what could be considered an act of economic espionage against the crown itself. The potential value of such intimate royal content could reach millions of pounds, creating financial incentives that might have corrupted someone previously thought to be trustworthy. What about the devices themselves? Any physical evidence? Lady Victoria uses a modified smartphone with specialized recording applications that can capture audio even when the device appears to be inactive, Chen explained. The applications are designed to be virtually undetectable during casual use, but they leave distinctive digital fingerprints in the device's memory allocation patterns. This revelation indicated a level of technical sophistication that went beyond opportunistic recording. Someone had provided Lady Victoria with professional-grade surveillance equipment, suggesting she might not be operating alone. The possibility of a larger conspiracy aimed at breaching royal privacy added new layers of complexity to an already delicate situation. Captain Wellington's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the Royal Protection Command headquarters. The preliminary background investigation into Lady Victoria Pemberton had uncovered financial irregularities that provided potential motive for her alleged activities. Significant gambling debts and several failed investment ventures had apparently left her in desperate financial circumstances, despite her position within the royal household. "Sir," Chen said, interrupting his thoughts, "there's something else you should know. According to the network logs, Lady Victoria attempted to access Princess Charlotte's personal computer account yesterday evening. The attempt failed due to password protection, but it suggests she may be escalating her surveillance activities." This news sent alarms racing through Captain Wellington's mind. Princess Charlotte's computer contained her school assignments, personal correspondence with friends, and private diary entries that she had been encouraged to write as part of her emotional therapy following the recent bullying incidents. The thought of someone attempting to access such intimate aspects of a vulnerable child's life filled him with protective fury. "I want that computer moved to secure storage immediately," he ordered, "and implement enhanced monitoring of all personal devices used by family members. If Lady Victoria is becoming more aggressive in her surveillance attempts, We need to stay ahead of her. As Chen began implementing the additional security measures, Captain Wellington reviewed the morning schedule. Princess Charlotte would be attending her private tutoring session in the palace library at 10 o'clock, followed by violin practice in the conservatory. Lady Victoria had no official duties that would require her presence in either location, making it an ideal opportunity to test their suspicions under controlled conditions. The plan that began forming in Captain Wellington's mind would require careful coordination with several other security personnel, but it offered the possibility of catching Lady Victoria in the act while protecting Princess Charlotte from further exploitation. If their suspicions proved correct, they would have the evidence needed to remove the threat. If they proved wrong, minimal harm would be done to someone who might be innocent of the accusations. At 9:30, Captain Wellington positioned himself in an alcove overlooking the main corridor leading to the library. From this vantage point, he could observe anyone approaching Princess Charlotte's tutoring session while remaining invisible to casual observation. 2 other security officers had taken similar positions covering alternate routes to ensure comprehensive surveillance. Princess Charlotte arrived precisely on time, accompanied by her private tutor, Dr. Margaret Thornfield. The 12-year-old princess carried her books and violin case with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to a structured daily routine. She appeared calm and focused, showing no obvious signs of distress that might indicate awareness of being secretly monitored. Dr. Thornfield, an elderly woman with decades of experience educating royal children, had been briefed on the situation without being given specific details about the investigation. Her instructions were simply to conduct the tutoring session normally, while being alert to any unusual interruptions or unexpected visitors. 20 minutes into the session, Captain Wellington's earpiece crackled with a whispered update from one of his colleagues. Target approaching from the west corridor. Moving slowly, checking surroundings frequently. Appears to be carrying recording device. Captain Wellington's pulse quickened as he prepared to observe Lady Victoria in action. If she attempted to secretly record Princess Charlotte's tutoring session, it would provide the definitive proof needed to justify more aggressive intervention. The technical specialists had positioned additional monitoring equipment to capture any wireless transmissions from recording devices, ensuring that evidence would be preserved regardless of what physical actions they could observe. Through his concealed position, Captain Wellington watched as Lady Victoria approached the library entrance with calculated casualness. She carried a leather portfolio and her ever-present smartphone, moving with the confident bearing of someone who belonged in the palace corridors. To anyone not specifically watching for suspicious behavior, she would appear to be simply going about her daily duties. But Captain Wellington's trained eye noticed the subtle signs that betrayed her true intentions. The way she paused at each corner to listen for voices, the manner in which she held her phone at an angle that would optimize audio recording, and most tellingly, the nervous tension in her posture that suggested someone preparing to commit a deliberate violation of trust. As Lady Victoria reached the library entrance, she stopped and appeared to fumble with her portfolio, dropping several papers in a manner that seemed accidentally clumsy, but positioned her directly beside the partially open door. Captain Wellington could see her phone's screen glowing as she activated what was presumably the recording application, though she held the device in a way that would make it appear she was simply checking messages. Inside the library, Princess Charlotte's voice could be heard discussing her history assignment with Dr. Thornfield. The young princess was explaining her research about medieval queens, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone genuinely interested in learning. The innocence of the moment, contrasted with the calculated violation of privacy occurring just outside the door, crystallized for Captain Wellington the full enormity of Lady Victoria's betrayal. "Target has activated recording device," came the whispered confirmation in his earpiece. "Signal intercept confirms active audio capture." Captain Wellington waited another 30 seconds to ensure the evidence was conclusive, then activated his secure communicator. "All units. This is Control. Initiate containment protocol. Move with extreme discretion to avoid alarming the princess." The next few minutes unfolded with the precision of a military operation. Captain Wellington approached Lady Victoria from behind while 2 other officers moved to block potential escape routes. The goal was to remove her from the vicinity of Princess Charlotte without creating a disturbance that might traumatize the young girl, or alert other members of the royal family before a complete investigation could be conducted. "Lady Victoria, Captain Wellington said quietly as he appeared beside her. "I need to speak with you immediately about a security matter. Please accompany me to my office." Lady Victoria spun around, her face showing a flash of panic before she composed herself into an expression of polite confusion. "I'm sorry, Captain, but I'm not sure what you mean. I was just reviewing some correspondence while waiting to speak with Dr. Pedestiniana Thornfield about Princess Charlotte's progress. Her explanation was smooth and delivered with practiced sincerity, but Captain Wellington noticed that she had quickly moved her phone into her pocket and was gripping her portfolio with white knuckles. The technical specialists would already have intercepted and documented her recording activities, but her attempt to conceal evidence in real time provided additional confirmation of conscious wrongdoing. "I understand completely," Captain Wellington replied with professional courtesy that masked his inner fury. "However, the security matter is quite urgent and cannot wait. I'm sure your conversation with Dr. Farrasco Thornfield can be rescheduled for later today." As they walked toward the administrative wing, Captain Wellington used hand signals to communicate with his team members. Princess Charlotte would continue her tutoring session without interruption, unaware that a serious security threat had just been neutralized in her immediate vicinity. Dr. Thornfield would be discreetly informed that the situation was under control, allowing her to focus on providing the princess with a normal, supportive educational experience. Lady Victoria maintained her composure during the walk, occasionally making polite small talk about palace administrative matters, but Captain Wellington could see the calculating intelligence behind her eyes as she undoubtedly tried to assess how much the security team might know about her activities. Her performance was impressive in its own way. She had clearly prepared for the possibility of eventual discovery and had rehearsed explanations for her behavior. But as they approached the secure conference room where the confrontation would take place, Captain Wellington felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that the evidence against her was overwhelming. The technical documentation, witness testimony from Prince Alexander, and now direct observation of her surveillance activities created a case that no amount of eloquent explanation could overcome. The moment of truth was approaching, and with it, the possibility of finally protecting Princess Charlotte and the rest of the royal family from further violation of their privacy. The secure conference room felt charged with tension as Captain Wellington closed the door behind them. Lady Victoria maintained her composed demeanor, but her eyes darted briefly toward the exits and the secure communication equipment visible on the walls. She was clearly intelligent enough to understand that this was not a routine security briefing. "Please have a seat," Captain Wellington said, gesturing toward the chair positioned across from where multiple folders of evidence lay waiting on the polished oak table. The room's soundproofing and electronic countermeasures ensured complete privacy for what was about to unfold. "Captain, I really should return to my duties," Lady Victoria attempted, her voice carrying just the right note of concerned efficiency. "The Princess Charlotte has a schedule to maintain, and I promised her grandmother I would review her progress in—" Lady Victoria. Captain Wellington interrupted firmly. "We need to discuss your recent activities involving unauthorized recording of private family conversations." The words hung in the air like an accusation that could not be retracted. Lady Victoria's carefully maintained composure flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression of fear that confirmed what Captain Wellington already knew. But she recovered quickly, arranging her features into an expression of shocked confusion that might have been convincing to someone not trained in recognizing deception. "I'm afraid I don't understand what you're suggesting," she said, settling into the chair with deliberate calm. "My duties bring me into contact with family members regularly, but I would never violate their privacy or trust. The very idea is deeply offensive." Captain Wellington opened the first folder and withdrew several printed documents. "These are network analysis reports showing data transmissions from your personal device over the past 3 weeks. Audio files uploaded to encrypted servers owned by intermediaries known to work with tabloid publications." Lady Victoria's eyes flicked to the documents, and Captain Wellington caught the moment when she recognized specific technical details that she knew she couldn't explain away. "I'm not particularly technical with electronic devices," she said carefully. "Perhaps there's been some kind of error or misinterpretation. The uploads consistently occurred within hours of private family interactions," Captain Wellington continued. laying out additional evidence methodically. Yesterday at 11:47 p.m., you uploaded a 47-minute audio file less than 6 hours after the family dinner where personal matters regarding parliamentary difficulties were discussed. This time, Lady Victoria's reaction was more pronounced. Her hands clasped together in her lap, and she shifted slightly in her chair. Small movements that indicated increasing stress despite her attempts to maintain innocent confusion. "Even if my phone somehow recorded something accidentally," she said, her voice taking on a defensive edge, "I certainly didn't knowingly upload anything anywhere. Perhaps someone has hacked my device or used it without my knowledge." Captain Wellington opened a second folder containing screenshots from the technical analysis. "The recording applications on your device require manual activation and conscious operation. They're professional-grade surveillance tools that don't come standard on consumer electronics. Someone specifically installed this software and trained you in its use." Lady Victoria stared at the technical evidence, and Captain Wellington could see her rapidly calculating whether continued denial was sustainable. Her breathing had become slightly faster, and a faint flush was creeping up her neck, physiological responses that confirmed the psychological pressure was having its intended effect. Furthermore, Captain Wellington continued, "Prince Alexander witnessed you recording Princess Charlotte on multiple occasions. He observed the recording indicator on your device and noticed your deliberate positioning during private conversations." At the mention of Prince Alexander, Lady Victoria's carefully constructed facade finally began to crack. Her eyes widened with genuine alarm, and she leaned forward slightly. "A child's imagination shouldn't be taken as... Should we bring Prince Alexander in to repeat his observations directly to you?" Captain Wellington asked quietly. The offer was a strategic gambit. He had no intention of subjecting the young prince to such a confrontation, but the suggestion might pressure Lady Victoria into admitting guilt rather than forcing an 8-year-old to testify against her. "That won't be necessary," Lady Victoria said quickly, then seemed to realize that her response might be interpreted as an admission. I wouldn't want to distress the boy with adult matters he might not fully understand." Captain Wellington studied her carefully. In his experience, this was often the moment when suspects began transitioning from denial to bargaining. Lady Victoria was clearly intelligent enough to recognize that the evidence was overwhelming, but she was also calculating whether she might still find a way to minimize the consequences of her actions. "Let's discuss the financial pressures that might have motivated these activities," Captain Wellington said, opening a third folder. "Our investigation has uncovered significant gambling debts and failed investment ventures that have left you in considerable financial difficulty." Lady Victoria's composed mask finally slipped entirely. Her shoulders sagged, and she closed her eyes briefly as if accepting defeat. When she opened them again, her expression had changed from confused innocence to weary resignation. "You don't understand the pressures," she said quietly. "The expectations, the lifestyle requirements, the constant need to maintain appearances while living on what amounts to a government salary. Everyone assumes that working for the royal family means wealth and security, but the reality is quite different." Captain Wellington recognized this as the beginning of a confession, but he remained professionally neutral. "Tell me about the recording activities." Lady Victoria was silent for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of shame and defiance. "It started small, just a few comments about household matters that I thought might be worth documenting for my own protection. The royal household can be unpredictable in terms of employment security, but it escalated beyond protecting yourself. The first time I captured something truly personal, Princess Charlotte discussing her troubles at school, I realized the potential value." Lady Victoria looked up with an expression that mixed guilt with pragmatic calculation. "The intermediaries I contacted were very encouraging about the market for authentic royal content. They explained how such material could be edited and presented in ways that would seem sympathetic rather than exploitative." Captain Wellington felt his anger rising but maintained his professional demeanor. "You exploited a vulnerable child's private struggles for financial gain. I told myself I was documenting history." Lady Victoria replied defensively. "Future biographers and historians would value authentic records of how the royal family dealt with contemporary challenges. I convinced myself that I was performing a service. By selling intimate recordings to tabloid publications, Lady Victoria's defensive posture crumbled further. The debts were crushing me. The gambling started as social entertainment at charity events, but it became compulsive. The investment losses were supposed to provide long-term security, but instead they created immediate crisis. When the intermediaries offered amounts that could solve all my problems at once, the temptation became overwhelming. Captain Wellington opened the final folder, containing documentation of the attempted access to Princess Charlotte's computer. Last night you tried to hack into Princess Charlotte's personal accounts. I was desperate, Lady Victoria admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The audio recordings were valuable, but the intermediaries suggested that written material, diary entries, personal communications, could be even more lucrative. They painted pictures of exclusive serializations that could run for months. The full scope of the betrayal was now clear. Lady Victoria had not only violated the family's privacy, but had been actively seeking to expand her surveillance activities to include the most intimate thoughts and communications of a 12-year-old girl dealing with serious emotional challenges. How many people are involved in this operation? Captain Wellington asked. 2 intermediaries who handle the technical aspects and media contacts, Lady Victoria replied. They provided the recording software and gave me instructions on optimal recording techniques. They've been planning a coordinated release designed to maximize both financial return and media impact. Captain Wellington's secure phone vibrated with an urgent message. The Royal Protection Command had intercepted communications indicating that the tabloid publications were preparing to begin publishing the stolen recordings within days. The investigation had arrived at a critical moment. Any delay in resolution could result in the private family conversations being broadcast globally. Lady Victoria, Captain Wellington said, leaning forward intensely, you have one opportunity to minimize the damage from this situation. I need the exact identities of your contacts, the locations of all recorded material, and your full cooperation in preventing publication. Lady Victoria looked at him with exhausted resignation. If I cooperate, what happens to me? That will depend on many factors, including the extent of your cooperation and the success of our efforts to contain this breach, Captain Wellington replied honestly. But I can tell you that your continued employment within the royal household is terminated immediately, and criminal charges are highly likely regardless of your cooperation level. Lady Victoria nodded slowly, seeming to accept the inevitability of consequences, while recognizing that cooperation offered her only chance of avoiding the most severe outcomes. The recordings are stored on servers controlled by a company called Digital Archives Limited. She began, her voice gaining strength as she committed to full disclosure. The primary contact is a man named David Thornsberry, who specializes in acquiring and marketing exclusive celebrity content. He's expecting the final batch of recordings tomorrow night, after which they plan to begin the publication process. Captain Wellington activated his secure communicator to relay this intelligence to the technical specialists who would coordinate with law enforcement to intercept the material before it could be distributed. As Lady Victoria continued providing details about the conspiracy she had participated in, Captain Wellington felt a mixture of professional satisfaction at solving the case and personal fury at the violation of trust that had endangered the royal family's privacy and security. The next phase would involve coordinating with multiple agencies to neutralize the threat while protecting the family from further exposure. But at least now they had the information needed to fight back against those who had sought to exploit their private pain for public consumption. Within 30 minutes of Lady Victoria's confession, Captain Wellington had coordinated with 3 different law enforcement agencies and activated emergency protocols that had never been used in peacetime. The scale of the operation required to neutralize the threat was unprecedented. Simultaneous raids on digital storage facilities, arrests of media intermediaries, and complete isolation of all potentially compromised material. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Morrison arrived at the palace with a team of digital forensic specialists and legal experts. As the lead investigator for crimes against the Crown, she brought both the authority and resources necessary to handle what was rapidly being classified as a matter of national security. The servers are located in a facility outside London. DCI Morrison briefed Captain Wellington as technicians established secure communication links. We have warrants for immediate seizure, but the suspects may have implemented dead man switches or remote deletion protocols. We need Lady Victoria's technical assistance to ensure we capture everything before it can be destroyed. Lady Victoria, now fully cooperative but visibly shaken by the magnitude of the consequences unfolding around her, worked with the forensics team to provide access codes and technical specifications. Her earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by genuine remorse, as she began to understand how her actions might have affected people she had lived and worked alongside for years. The primary server contains approximately 60 hours of recordings spanning the past month, she explained to the technical team. But Thornsbury mentioned backup systems and international distribution networks designed to ensure publication even if the primary operation was compromised. Captain Wellington felt a chill at this revelation. Professional media pirates often employed sophisticated contingency plans that could make complete suppression nearly impossible. The race was not just against time, but against adversaries who had prepared for exactly this type of law enforcement response. "What about Princess Charlotte?" he asked DCI Morrison quietly. "How much does she need to know about what's been happening?" "That depends on what we find in the recordings," Morrison replied grimly. "If they've captured truly intimate moments or conversations that could be psychologically damaging if made public, she may need to be prepared for potential exposure. Better that she hear it from people who care about her than discover it in newspaper headlines." This was the nightmare scenario that Captain Wellington had been dreading. Princess Charlotte was already struggling with the pressures of royal life and recent bullying incidents. Learning that someone she trusted had been secretly recording her most vulnerable moments could cause profound psychological damage that might affect her development and relationship with public life for years to come. In the library, Princess Charlotte continued her tutoring session with Dr. Thornfield, completely unaware that her private world was being dissected by law enforcement teams and technical specialists. The security protocols ensured that her normal routine remained undisturbed while the crisis unfolded around her. But Captain Wellington knew that this protective isolation could not be maintained indefinitely. His secure communicator buzzed with updates from the coordinated raids. The primary server facility had been successfully secured, but initial analysis suggested that significant amounts of data had been transferred to secondary locations within the past 24 hours. Thornsbury and his associates had apparently detected unusual network activity and begun implementing their contingency plans. "We've arrested 3 individuals, including Thornsbury," DCI Morrison reported. "But they're claiming the recordings have already been delivered to publication partners, and that stopping distribution is now impossible. It could be a bluff designed to increase their negotiating position, or it could be accurate." Lady Victoria overheard this update and paled visibly. "They showed me contracts with several international publications," she said urgently. "The plan was for simultaneous release across multiple countries to maximize global impact and prevent any single government from effectively suppressing the story." Captain Wellington felt the situation spiraling beyond their ability to control it through normal channels. The possibility of Princess Charlotte's private struggles being broadcast globally within days required consideration of extraordinary measures that went well beyond typical palace security protocols. "We need to brief the king immediately," he decided. "The family needs to understand what they're potentially facing and begin preparing public response strategies." As if summoned by the gravity of the moment, King Charles III's private secretary arrived with instructions for Captain Wellington to report to the king's study immediately. Word of the security crisis had reached the highest levels of the royal household through channels that moved faster than official briefings. The walk to the king's study felt endless, despite the familiar corridors that Captain Wellington had traveled thousands of times. How do you tell a monarch that his family's privacy has been systematically violated by someone they trusted, and that intimate recordings of his granddaughter's struggles might soon become international news? King Charles received the briefing with the stoic composure that comes from decades of managing public crises. But Captain Wellington could see the personal pain in the monarch's eyes when the conversation turned to the potential impact on Princess Charlotte. The king's questions were precise and focused on protecting his family while acknowledging the broader implications for the monarchy's public image. "How long before we know definitively whether publication can be prevented?" the king asked. DCI Morrison estimates we'll have a complete assessment within 6 hours. Captain Wellington replied. But given the international distribution networks that may be involved, complete suppression might not be achievable even if we move aggressively. The king was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window toward the gardens where Princess Charlotte often walked with her dog. She's been through so much already with the school situation. The idea that her private pain might become public entertainment is unconscionable. Your Majesty, there may be ways to minimize the damage even if some material is eventually published, Captain Wellington suggested carefully. Controlled disclosure, contextual framing, preemptive public statements that cast the recordings in terms of privacy violation rather than scandalous revelation. What about criminal prosecution? Can we make this so expensive and legally dangerous for publications that they choose not to proceed? That's certainly one strategy, but it comes with risks, Captain Wellington admitted. Aggressive legal action might actually increase public interest and media attention. Sometimes the attempt to suppress information creates more publicity than the information itself would have generated. The king nodded grimly, recognizing the impossible balancing act between protecting his family and managing public perception. I want to speak with Princess Charlotte personally, before she learns about this from any other source. She deserves to hear the truth from someone who loves her, not discover it through media reports or playground gossip. This decision reflected both the king's personal courage and his understanding of his granddaughter's psychological needs. Princess Charlotte would need time to process the betrayal of trust and prepare for potential public exposure of her private struggles. But she would also need to understand that her family stood united in supporting her through whatever consequences might emerge. Shall I arrange for additional counseling support? Captain Wellington asked. Yes, but discreetly. She'll need professional help processing this, but we can't make it obvious that we're treating her as a victim. That could be almost as damaging as the original violation. As their meeting concluded, Captain Wellington felt the weight of responsibility for protecting not just the physical security of the royal family, but their emotional and psychological well-being. The technical aspects of stopping the recording's publication were complex enough, but the human dimensions of helping a vulnerable 12-year-old girl navigate this crisis required skills that went far beyond traditional security training. His secure communicator buzzed again with an urgent update from DCI Morrison. The forensics team had discovered evidence suggesting that the recorded material included not just conversations involving Princess Charlotte, but potentially compromising discussions between adult family members about sensitive political and personal matters. The crisis was expanding beyond a child privacy issue into a potential threat to the constitutional monarchy itself. The next few hours would determine whether a single individual's financial desperation might trigger consequences that could affect the British crown for generations to come. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade over Rosemont Palace when Captain Wellington received the call that would define the rest of his career. DCI Morrison's voice carried both relief and concern as she delivered the news that the joint law enforcement operation had achieved partial success. The primary servers containing the recordings had been secured, but not before a significant portion of the most sensitive material had been distributed to international media outlets. We've confirmed that intimate recordings of Princess Charlotte discussing her struggles with bullying and social anxiety have been delivered to at least 3 major tabloid organizations, Morrison reported. However, we've also identified something that gives us leverage. Several recordings that appear to violate international privacy laws and child protection statutes. This development offered a potential legal pathway to prevent publication, but it would require rapid coordination with international authorities and media law specialists. Captain Wellington felt a mixture of hope and anxiety as he considered the implications. Legal victories might prevent the most damaging disclosures, but the process itself would likely generate significant publicity about the attempted breach of royal privacy. In the king's study, an emergency meeting was underway with the most senior members of the royal communications team. The discussion centered around a fundamental strategic question: whether to proactively address the potential publications through public statements or maintain silence and hope that legal intervention would make disclosure unnecessary. The risk of acknowledging the recordings publicly is that it validates their newsworthiness, argued Sir James Whitworth, the king's principal private secretary. Once we confirm that sensitive family conversations were captured, the appetite for obtaining and publishing them increases dramatically. But if we remain silent and the recordings are eventually published, we appear either unaware or unprepared, countered Dame Elizabeth Crawford, the palace's communications director. Public sympathy tends to favor those who are perceived as proactive victims rather than reactive subjects. King Charles listened to these strategic considerations while maintaining focus on his primary concern, his granddaughter's well-being.
What do the child psychologists recommend regarding Princess Charlotte's involvement in any public response?
Patricia Hamilton, the palace's consulting child psychologist, had been reviewing the situation for the past hour. Involving her in public statements could help her regain a sense of agency and control. But it also confirms the violation and might make her feel more exposed. The decision should ultimately be hers, with appropriate support and guidance. Captain Wellington's secure communicator buzzed with an update that changed everything. Lady Victoria, working with the forensics team to decode the distribution networks, had discovered that one of the planned publications had been scheduled to begin the next morning. Legal injunctions might prevent later publications, but the first release of recorded material was already in motion and might be unstoppable. "Your Majesty," Captain Wellington said, entering the meeting with undisguised urgency, "we have confirmation that partial publication will begin tomorrow morning, regardless of our intervention efforts. We need to decide immediately how to respond." The room fell silent as the reality of the situation crystallized. All the strategic planning and legal maneuvering had been building toward this moment, the transition from crisis management to damage control. King Charles stood slowly, his decision process complete. "I want to speak with Princess Charlotte now, before anyone else has the opportunity to shape her understanding of these events. She deserves to learn about this from her grandfather, not from newspaper headlines or internet speculation." Captain Wellington felt profound respect for the king's courage in taking personal responsibility for delivering devastating news to a vulnerable child. The conversation that was about to take place would require extraordinary sensitivity and wisdom, balancing honesty about the betrayal with reassurance about her family's continued support and protection. Princess Charlotte was located in the conservatory, practicing violin as she did every afternoon at this time. The glass-walled room filled with exotic plants had been her sanctuary, but it had also been the location where some of her most private moments had been secretly recorded. Captain Wellington wondered whether she would ever be able to feel safe in that space again. "Charlotte, dear, would you come with me to my study?" King Charles asked gently when he arrived at the conservatory. "There's something important we need to discuss." The 12-year-old princess looked up from her violin with the immediate concern that children develop when they sense adult anxiety. "Is everything all right, Grandpapa? You look worried." "Everything will be all right," the king assured her, "but there's a situation we need to talk about together." As they walked through the palace corridors, Captain Wellington maintained a discreet distance while ensuring their security. He could see the king's internal struggle as he prepared to explain betrayal and violation to someone who had every right to expect safety and trust within her own home. In the study, King Charles explained the situation with remarkable clarity and age-appropriate honesty. He told Princess Charlotte about Lady Victoria's secret recordings, the financial motivations behind the betrayal, and the efforts being made to prevent publication of her private conversations. He emphasized that she had done nothing wrong, and that the entire family was united in supporting her through whatever consequences might emerge. Princess Charlotte listened with the composed attention that had been trained into her since early childhood, but Captain Wellington could see the emotional impact registering in her expression. Confusion, hurt, anger, and fear cycling through her features as she processed the magnitude of the betrayal. "Will everyone at school know about the things I said when I was crying?" she asked quietly. "We're doing everything possible to prevent that," King Charles replied honestly. "But we want you to be prepared for the possibility that some private conversations might become public. If that happens, we'll face it together as a family." Princess Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, her expression showed a maturity that seemed decades beyond her 12 years. "Lady Victoria seemed so kind when I was upset about the bullies. She said she understood how hard it was to be different, and that she wanted to help me feel better." Captain Wellington felt his anger toward Lady Victoria intensify as he heard Princess Charlotte describe the emotional manipulation that had made her vulnerable to exploitation. The betrayal was not just a violation of privacy, but a calculated abuse of trust that had targeted a child during her most difficult moments. "Some people make choices that hurt others," King Charles said carefully. "Lady Victoria's choices were wrong, and she will face consequences for them. But that doesn't mean the kindness you felt wasn't real, or that you were foolish to trust someone who seemed caring." "What happens now?" Princess Charlotte asked. "Now we show the world how strong and resilient you are," King Charles replied. "We demonstrate that our family stands together, regardless of what others try to do to us, and we make sure that you have all the support and protection you need to continue growing into the remarkable young woman you're becoming." Captain Wellington's communicator buzzed with a final update from DCI Morrison. The legal injunctions had been successfully filed in multiple jurisdictions, creating significant obstacles for publications attempting to use the recorded material. While complete suppression might not be achievable, the legal barriers would likely limit the scope and impact of any disclosures. More importantly, the investigation had uncovered evidence of a larger network of individuals targeting various public figures for similar surveillance and exploitation. Lady Victoria's case would become part of a broader law enforcement effort that might prevent future privacy violations against other prominent families. As the immediate crisis transitioned into longer-term management, Captain Wellington reflected on the lessons learned from the past 48 hours. The threat to royal privacy had come not from external enemies or sophisticated international conspiracies, but from someone within the trusted inner circle who had allowed financial pressure to override personal loyalty and professional ethics. Princess Charlotte would require ongoing support as she processed both the betrayal itself and any public attention that might result from it. But she had demonstrated remarkable resilience and maturity in facing the situation, supported by a family that prioritized her well-being above all other considerations. The security protocols surrounding the royal family would be enhanced to include additional safeguards against insider threats, but the fundamental challenge would remain: balancing the openness necessary for normal family relationships with the protection required for public figures living under constant scrutiny. As evening fell over Rosemont Palace, Captain Wellington felt cautiously optimistic that they had contained the most serious consequences of Lady Victoria's betrayal. The recordings might never be completely suppressed, but the family was prepared to face whatever challenges emerged with unity and strength. Princess Charlotte would continue her violin practice in the conservatory, but now she would do so with the knowledge that her family had fought to protect her privacy and would continue fighting to ensure her safety and security. The sanctuary had been violated, but it had also been reclaimed through the combined efforts of those who truly cared about her well-being. The Royal Guard had indeed smashed Lady Victoria's phone, metaphorically if not literally, by destroying her network of surveillance and exploitation. More importantly, they had protected a vulnerable child from further harm and sent a clear message that violations of royal privacy would be met with swift and comprehensive response. The palace secret had been exposed, but in being exposed, it had also been resolved through the courage of a young prince who spoke truth, the dedication of security professionals who valued protection over convenience, and the wisdom of family members who chose transparency and unity over denial and isolation. In the end, Princess Charlotte's dignity and security had been preserved not through secrecy, but through the willingness of those who loved her to confront difficult truths and take decisive action to defend what mattered most.